Welcome to Soul Thrive, where we explore spirituality through healing trauma, shadow work, and applying the laws of the universe in order to master ourselves without the fear of the unknown. Hey guys, welcome to another episode on the Soul Thrive podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to our next guest, Tiffany. Tiffany, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hey, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited. My name's Tiffany Alexander. I live in Arkansas and I'm a school teacher, full-time math and science. I teach third grade, but I have a podcast called The Journey Within with Tiffany K, which is a podcast that kind of started off as Tiff Talks. And then the more I was on my own soul's journey, it morphed into I really want to be a voice for women
Mhm.
and equality and shattering beauty standards and then relationship patterns because that's
Mhm.
been a huge part of my soul's journey back to a place of self-love. And I'm still on this journey. But yeah, I love to hike. I love nature. I'm kind of tinkering with being a vegan, but I really don't know what the hell I'm doing. So, so there's that. My consciousness as it rises, there's so many things every day that I learn about myself, and I see mirrors constantly. I'm starting to understand what my intuition means and what that means. I'm like, okay, is this discernment? So it's been a journey, but I'm finally getting to that point where I have a lot more gratitude. And I was just crying in my kitchen this morning, matter of fact,
Mm.
dancing. And as I'm dancing, I start bawling. And
Oh.
I'm like, oh my God, this is what gratitude really truly feels like in this moment. So it's great.
I love this. I love all of it. I'm excited to dive into this conversation with you. Usually Ivana prepares herself a little bit more. I kind of go with the flow, and she's got a little bit more of like the structure between the two of us.
It's a
Pisces,
great
Virgo.
balance.
That's what we always say.
Yeah, the Pisces and the Virgo.
Yeah, but it's so when I read your bio, I was like, I can't wait to talk to you because your story seems so unique and so like there's so much that you've gone through. You mentioned that you at one point left a narcissistic relationship, that your best friend of 26 years ended her life, and that you were discovering throughout this journey how your childhood wounds and your religious trauma impacted your relationship choices and how you operated as an adult. I know there was a
Ooh,
lot.
that's juicy.
That's
There's
a
a
lot.
lot
I know
here.
that's not even like half of it, right? But there's a lot to unpack there. So I was
Right.
curious if there's one of those three things that you maybe wanted to start talking about and telling us sort of how you unraveled and how that affected your who you were as an
At that
adult.
time, or maybe
Yeah.
even now as you've
Yeah.
grown into stepping into your gratitude, of course,
Yes, yes.
navigating through those challenges.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because like trying to like really navigate and pinpoint one particular thing, it's hard to even do that. But I'll start off with whenever I have an estranged relationship with my mother. We don't have a relationship at all. She was really my first narcissistic relationship.
Mhm.
And then when my best friend committed suicide, and then I left a narcissistic abusive relationship that I was extremely trauma bonded to, it was all within a 6 month period.
Wow.
Oh
And
wow.
but it catapulted me into a spiritual awakening to start to
Mhm.
seek my truth. And the religious trauma is something I'm still honestly
Processing.
working
Yeah.
through. But with the relationship that I was in, the narcissistic abusive relationship that I left, I remember when I was with him, I was like, why do some of these feelings still feel so familiar? And I
Mhm.
remember laying on his chest one time and we had just had a fight. And the very person that was causing me pain, I was also seeking for comfort.
Oh, yes.
And as I was laying on his chest, I was like, man, this feels like home. And something just clicked in me that said, home is not safe.
Hmm.
And and that was like my beginning of as I'm bawling my eyeballs on my couch, trying to grieve my best friend, grieve him, grieve my mother. I was like, I'm the common denominator in every part of my life. And what does this say about me? Like I took some blame for my best friend's death. I was taking blame for like my mother. And I was like, this is a mirror. It's trying to show you that you have to go within and figure out why you lack self-respect, self-love. And it kept you in these relationships because he actually wasn't my first abusive relationship. It was just to a much darker scale. Let's just
Right.
say that.
Hmm.
Um, but it's like I started meditating. I didn't understand it. You know, I was always taught if you didn't pray for forgiveness for a deity outside of yourself and someone else to save you, that you're doing something wrong. So it was just little nuggets. I started to get out in nature more. I started to journal more. And if you look at my journals, I have like 5 journals. They look like different people. Like I've got one journal where I'm begging the Lord to save me and for
Yeah.
forgiveness for all these sins. And then now it's like I'm giving gratitude for what the universe shows me every single day, even if there's pain, because I'm also learning that even though joy is our greatest blessings, our greatest teachers it's the pain that we have to
Mhm.
go through. It's that darkness that we have to go through. I know I'm kind of all over the place with that,
No, that's
but
okay. We like the journey. That's the whole point. That's what the journey is all about. It's being all over the place and not
Hmm.
knowing, you're taking all these connections and all these experiences and you're trying to make sense of them and process grief and then try to execute that in your life and in your experiences now. So it's normal to feel like I don't know where I begin or where I end because there really isn't a beginning and an end, right? With that as well.
right.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Because like it really makes me feel seen and heard because it really isn't a lot of times when I'm talking, it's like, man, this is not ADHD. It's just there's so much.
Yes.
There's
And
so much to
Hmm.
yeah.
pack into the journey of healing, of course, which is I'm learning is a lifetime. But plant medicine has been a big tool for me as well. I've done 4 ayahuasca ceremonies and 1 bufo ceremony. And I remember the first time I did Bufo, it was like I was surrounded, which now it felt like the most support that I had never felt, the
Mm,
strongest love that I had never felt. And I remember it was like I could see faces and it was like Indians and animals and all
mm,
these things just
mm.
swirling around me. But it wasn't even about the visions that I had or the bright white light. It was the feeling.
Right.
And I'd never felt that love before. And
Right.
it hit me. And when I came to, I looked at the shaman and I just started bawling
Yeah.
again, gratitude. And I think for so many years, I just stayed in my head. And I'm not against Western meds or therapy. I'm
No,
not
no.
saying that. It's
Yeah.
definitely
I
part of my
think,
journey.
yeah, I think a lot of people who do plant medicine, it's a call. You got to be called to do it. It's not for
Absolutely.
everyone. I'm going to say this and I'm going to use a disclaimer at the end of the day because I really want people to understand that there are levels of trauma. And like sometimes in order to get to a destination, you're going to be
Mhm.
called to do the plant medicine to get to fast track you because maybe you stayed too long in a pattern or too long in an experience. And there were layers of your subconscious that needed that upgrade immediately to make the
Yep.
decisions that you needed to move into a direction, which then is part of your life path and life experience. It is, I do not recommend, in my opinion, that everyone should take ayahuasca or go down this spiritual journey because given the fact that I've worked with individuals for a very long time now when I'm doing like inner child trauma or working on shadow emotions within the subconscious, um, the ones that have weren't called and went to did ayahuasca, when they came back to me, they were more fragmented. There was more trauma that I had to heal versus
Yep.
the ones that were called to. The ones that were called to, they understood that there was this unraveling of their life and their experience. So, like how
Mhm.
you did, like you
Yep.
blew up your life blew up for you. And so then you were called, your soul's mission was ignited to put you on the path of where you are right now versus
Yes.
someone who's going to go do ayahuasca and then go right back into their life and their experience and nothing is changing. There's a
Absolutely.
massive difference there, which that's why for your energy, when I'm reading your energy, you were called. Like it was a
Oh,
calling.
absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, it was 4 years ago that I started, but I didn't have my first ayahuasca ceremony until last year in March.
Mhm,
And it had been calling me for a year. And
mhm.
because of my religious trauma, I just kept fighting it and fighting it. And
Yeah.
every time I turned around, there was something that was just like a synchronicity after synchronicity. And it's crazy because the guy that I'm in union with now, and he very much is a massive mirror for me. It's to the point of almost insanity. It's like I know I've always heard the divine feminine goes first, but wow.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, like I met him through the plant medicine journey,
Hmm.
and I would totally agree with that. It's not for someone to just grab a hold of because they're desperate for healing. It
Hmm.
has to be something that you sit with, and you have to have a good intention and continue to sit with it. Every time I was called to it, I would sit with it and try to feel it in my body and really
Yep.
understand why I was being called. So yeah, I do not recommend people just to go out there as a tool of desperation.
No, I don't either because it's just going to fragment you even more. It may even cause a sense of psychosis as well. I've seen that happen. I've seen people's energy really out of alignment with it too, which to a degree is also the reason to why they then find me or they want to find another healer. It kind of forces them to go back into alignment in other ways as well. So there's a positive there too, a little bit, but I do
Yeah.
come definitely comes from more of an empowered. You came from more of an empowered state of like, I've surrendered. There's nothing more that I can do. I've given into this now because I need to step into my power and like, and your conviction at the end of the day. And like,
Right.
can you elaborate a little bit more about your religious trauma, like just a little bit more so that I can understand like the calling and why it pushed you into that direction as much because that's got to conflict in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I was raised Church of Christ. I'm
Okay.
not sure if you're familiar, but it's extremely conservative. It to give you a little bit of an example and the listeners a little bit understanding. It was like we went to the church every Sunday, so every Sunday night, every Wednesday, every revival. If you didn't go, that was
Mhm.
bad. Women were told they could not speak in the church, so women were silenced. There were no leaders that were female within the church. And not just that, but it was like everything was a rule. You weren't if you drank, that's a sin. If you swam with boys, like when I went to church camp, we couldn't swim, boys and girls couldn't swim together. Um, and then it was a lot of shame. It was a lot of shame and guilt, where to the point where every time I would leave a sermon, I felt bad about myself.
Right,
It wasn't, a lot of times I'll hear people, they'll say they'll go to a sermon and they're just like uplifted,
right.
and that was not my experience growing
Mhm.
up. I always felt shame for every little thing that I did because I thought I was doing something wrong in the Lord's eyes. And so
Right.
when you are not only my trauma, but my, generational trauma for years and years and years of suppression of women and suppression within the church and just, the whole patriarchy system around a lot of religion, it's like I did not recognize how much that micromanaged my life. Based off decisions. It was always based off what is right or wrong. What does the Bible say? What does Jesus want me to do? So it's funny because I actually the last time I did plant medicine, I actually saw Jesus, well,
Mhm.
Yeshua,
Mhm.
in my vision. And it was like he was showing me. I went to kneel in my vision, and he gets my hand and picks me up and said, "No, like
Mhm.
I'm not your savior. You are your savior." And
Mhm.
and so I think it was a big tool for me, and also just that repressed anger because I released. I remember I was so exhausted after the last ceremony, and my energy was just zapped, and I said, man, that must have been a lot of anger because I was always the good girl. I didn't feel
Mhm.
anger. I always kind of leaned towards sadness. Like I felt sadness all the time, but I never felt true healthy anger. And I
Right.
also never had boundaries, and especially with men. And so I remember sitting in that ceremony, and I was so drained, and I was like, wow, that was a lot of anger, from this lifetime. And it was like, no, that was lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And it was explosive because that really catapulted me to another stage of awakening, where I came home and there were things that I felt like that were really dark.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, what is this trying to teach me? And I didn't understand it at the time, but I recognized it was the suppression of my voice,
Mm-hmm.
and it was also that good girl mentality that so often we are taught. And it was all through that religious upbringing. Because although my parents did the best they could with what they knew, and they have their own wounds and their own trauma, it was like they just continued to push that. Because I remember my mom didn't want me taking my kids to the Baptist church because she was like, well, they don't do the Lord's Supper every Sunday. So it's like, okay, we can judge other religions because they don't do it this way, but yet we're
Mhm.
supposed to love thy neighbor. Like,
Right,
you
right.
just got to fucking,
Conflicted.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Even more
yeah.
rules. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I didn't know what was right from wrong. I was constantly questioning everything
Right.
based off religion. And, I'm one minute I'm told to love thy neighbor, and the next minute I'm told to shun someone because they're homosexual. And I mean, it was terrible. And I'm
Yeah.
like, we should love everyone. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm to the point in my life where I still have a hard balance. Like, I'll give you a quick, for instance, I was at a ball game this morning with my daughter and my granddaughter, and I can see a lot of characteristics of my oldest daughter that are very much like her father.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, I'm on this soul's journey. I'm learning about people's energy. I'm learning about, I can recognize so many things, how she acts different when her dad's around, where I never noticed that before. But I want to see everything with love. But where's that balance where I can be my granddaughter's protector,
Hmm.
but also recognize they have their own journey.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I'm at now.
Mhm.
But yeah, religious trauma has been one it's been very difficult, and I really think the universe brought me plant medicine to help with a lot of that, because those 3 years of just
Yep.
journaling and meditating
Wasn't
and
doing enough.
going,
It wouldn't break those belief
Hmm.
systems because it was so ingrained in you from such a little kid, right? And so this is similar to like being in a cult. Like it's kind of got
yeah.
that cult like feeling where
Hmm.
the behaviors are conditioned so much and normalized. They tend to become part of you, whether you register or not. And then you think it's like a fight, eternal struggle within yourself. So
Yeah.
you needed something to, that's what I said, it was a calling. It pulled you into the direction to crack you open so that it can
Mhm.
really get you to see a different point of perspective. Because it's
Right.
hard. I've worked with people who have had, like, whether they were Catholic or Christian, it was like they have this Catholic guilt. It's like they think that by being spiritual, or they'd come to me for, let's say, a reading, and I would talk to their
Mhm.
deceased loved ones. I'd often get questioned like, "Are you really talking to my deceased loved one, or is this like the demon? Like, is it a demon?" And I'd be
Yeah.
like, I don't know how I'm going to explain this to you. There's more than the universe and you understand. So their limitations was is a hindrance in a lot of ways, right? Now I think
Mhm.
more people are being more open-minded to it. But at
Right.
the beginning stages, I could see the trauma and the wounds and like the conflict of how they were raised in these traditions. And so it was, I think, a beautiful experience for you from what I'm hearing, what I'm gathering, that you were called to do that so that you could start seeing more of this like universe from a different point of view and
Hmm.
really lean into your spirituality and your process, which is a really beautiful thing, especially where you're from as well, because where you're from, I'm sure,
I'm deeply embedded in the Bible Belt.
right? Yeah, you're like right there, smack in the middle of it, which is like interesting because I feel in a lot of ways it's like this awakening that needs to happen in certain parts of where you're like where you're raised or where you're located to serve and continue that process and that purpose, right? So
Right.
very interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like by everything that you've describing, there's just like a lack of self-expression when you were younger. It's almost like you don't know who you are. You can't express your emotions, and you're saying like I can't even like I never felt this anger before because you were probably not allowed to even at home have an emotional outburst. And then I feel
Right.
like, then how do you grow up without a sense of self? So then how do you navigate life
Hmm.
without a sense
Hmm.
of self? And that's where I guess the people pleasing would come in, not really choosing the right relationships. Um, Talk to me a little bit about the body dysmorphia, because you mentioned that and the whole image and the pressure that is being put on women today. How did that come about? Is that also as a result of the religious trauma?
I don't believe it's as much of the religious trauma as much as it's probably part of. I started off in beauty pageants when I was little,
That's
and my
also
mom,
something that they do in the South. Yeah.
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 yes, and although I loved the stage because I remember I was a very bubbly child, one of my favorite memories is going on stage and actually talking, and I wasn't afraid. But my mother heavily criticized me growing up. So I think, and it wasn't just always my looks, but a lot of times it was. And like she told me I didn't look good in orange and yellow, that I didn't need to wear it. I remember she would put rollers in my hair every Saturday night where I would look good for church on Sunday, and I would cry because they hurt and I had to sleep in them. So it's like that even embedded in me. Your looks and your appearance mean way more than your safety and your comfort. Now, I didn't recognize that until I started on my healing journey and I started to really walk through these steps of trying to reparent myself. But it was like appearance was a big deal. She would tell me to sit up straight. You crossed your legs when you sat down. You don't sit like
Mhm.
a boy. And it's like the more you sit with yourself and the more I would meditate and integrate even the plant ceremonies, the more I recognized how much pressure I had put on me to be that perfect little girl. And that also bled into my appearance because I still struggle with looking a certain way or being a certain way, because I want to be 50 this summer. And, I'm just trying to embrace the wrinkles and the skin and the stretch marks and the excess skin and realize that, that doesn't define my worth.
Mhm. Well, you look fabulous for 50. But
Thanks.
I understand how that feels like aging and then having that huge emphasis when you're a little girl. Like you got to look right, you got to be pretty, you can't talk like that. You're like a little doll syndrome, right? Like you're just like there
Hmm.
for their
Yeah.
amusement and
Yeah.
validating them as parents and like they're doing a good job and this is what this whole unit is supposed to look like. And that then spirals into relationship dynamics, which is also an emphasis at you, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, because relationship the last narcissistic abusive relationship that I left, he, a lot of times when people don't recognize when they're love bombing you and they're gathering all this data,
Mhm.
um, it's stored and they know where your insecurities lie. And I remember one night he looked at me and he said, you're in your late 40s or you're almost 46 and you have 13 asses. But he was referring to the cellulite that I was beginning to get and some of my excess skin. And it traumatized me because
Wow.
my worth was in him. My worth was in other people. My worth was in what people thought of me. And
Right.
so as women or even men become, they get so sick of the way life is and they become on this journey where they are the most important thing. You start to recognize like, wow, I really did put my heart in everyone's hands, but it's because you're afraid to look at yourself and really know thyself. And so it's like, do I love still getting my nails painted? Absolutely.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
do I give two shits if my nails aren't painted? Also, absolutely, because
Right.
it doesn't define who I am. And it's taken me a long time to get there.
Right.
And even in the relationship that I'm in now, um, I don't know a lot about twin flames and things of that nature. I'm still learning. But even whenever he says things that make me feel seen and heard, I'm used to someone being like, you're hot and sexy. And he doesn't talk to me that way. It's more out of respect and love for me as a person. And
Right.
that even feels uncomfortable,
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And so it's a crazy journey, but like I said, I'm finally getting to the point where I have a lot more gratitude. If you would have caught me on a podcast episode probably 6 months ago, that was the dark part of the dark night of the soul. That was, yeah,
Right.
it was terrible. I mean, I'm thankful for having energy each and every day to put me in my job and be able to love my students, but yeah, it was rough.
Yeah. Yeah. Dark nights of the soul usually are really difficult because they really do reflect everything within our subconscious. And they're there
Yes,
to really mirror back all our pain. And then we have to navigate through that alone. And
yes,
right?
yes,
Because like it's hard. People don't understand it when you're going through it sometimes, like unless someone understands what a dark night of the soul actually is. Right.
right.
And then, I don't know what type of support you had around you. I mean, losing your best friend and not having your confidant, right? The person that you could go to as well to be able to navigate your journey and, through the abuse you've been through, it must have
Mhm.
been really difficult.
was extremely difficult because no one understood. And, someone can get sick or die from a heart attack or cancer or whatever, and people were very comfortable with that type of
Yep.
death.
Yep.
But at school, when I went back to work, people didn't know how to talk to me. I didn't get the flowers and the cards because honestly, it's like people would just text me and be like, "I'm so sorry to hear about your best friend," and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
And I remember because I was still living in a state of very much victim mentality
Mm,
back then, it hurt my feelings.
of course.
And then as I moved forward, I started just to understand it better. Like people don't understand it. It's uncomfortable for them.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that you're not loved or cared for it or whatever, but it's
Yeah.
like I don't need that outside external, support as much as I used to, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
But but I know one thing like that I did want to add is the last ceremony that I did go to, I could see my inner child and I could hear her, and I had to reparent her in some ways. When I came home, I couldn't hear her anymore, but my consciousness would allow me to see her
Okay.
and what she was doing, and then I could see shadows flying around, and it was kind of crazy because it was like there was this shadow that was attached with chains on the top of the ceiling, and then there was an angry one that was kind of flying around, here and there. And then there was another one that was in the corner and it was just like scared. And I remember thinking, what is this? What is this? I don't understand any of this. So I worked with Zachary Pike. He's a coach that works with your ego and shadow work. And now I've integrated my shadows. And so I don't see them anymore, but I can hear them. And
Yeah.
so we're
Yeah.
still working on that, but it's
So
like I'm
that
learning.
what you're referring to is soul retrieval.
Hey, well, maybe that's why you're with me right now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know because it's like I can hear them, and
Yep.
sometimes they're extremely helpful and sometimes they are not. And the crazy thing is, though, it's like I was like, man, I can see why people back in the day would get pinged as schizophrenic and get put in
Oh,
a,
yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
and women would get burned at the stake because I mean,
Yes,
I will
because there's
literally have to stop myself from talking out loud to them.
yeah, well, because
Um,
it's a state of psychosis, right? You've gone through other avenues and in the realms of these other experiences, and people when you
mhm,
don't know, like that's why I say you have to use discernment when you're using these plant medicines, because if you don't have enough context around where you're navigating in what realm, you can get caught up in a realm, and like in
right.
that veil between where you are now and where that aspect of you was, and we haven't retrieved that part of you and integrated it properly, then yes, you're still going to be having access and communicating whatever that other realm is. So good or
Hmm.
bad. Like for instance, if I'm doing a soul retrieval on someone who's gone through like let's say religious abuse or childhood sexual abuse, it's very common for a fragment or a soul fragment to go into the land of the dead. And so my job is to go navigate hidden, cloaked, navigate through that to go retrieve this part of them to bring it back whole to their soul. So there's
Okay.
layers to this that a lot of people don't understand, and this is why I always say, you have to use discernment when you're doing certain things, and it's good because shadow work
Yeah.
is one aspect and soul retrieval is another aspect and inner child work is another aspect. They're all different layers.
And is it based on the intensity of the trauma?
Yeah.
You pick a different approach,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Does that clarify
That
that a
makes
little bit?
Just say that again.
Does that clarify that? So,
Yes, it does. Because it's kind of nuts because like I can be like this morning I was in the kitchen after I came back from the game and I was so creative. I love to take ingredients from my kitchen and just make something with no cookbook. And
mhm,
I'm learning that I really love to do that. And so I'm like dancing in the kitchen and I'm like, oh, is this creativity right now? Or are
mhm.
you trying to get me sidetracked because I need to do this, this, and this? And
A little
you
bit of
know
both.
yeah, and so I'm just getting to the point where I don't question it. I just am trying to trust myself
Mhm,
in making those decisions. But it's funny that I found you on Instagram because the literally my podcast, every person that I have met in
mhm.
some way has either been a coach for me or they've helped me in some way. Or I've had to go back and re-listen to the episode, and there's gems that I drop myself.
Right,
Mhm.
right, right,
And
right.
so one day I was sitting and I was meditating, and it was like, that journey is for you. Like, don't have an outcome whether your podcast will take off and be successful. It's really part of your soul's journey. Just don't have an outcome. Just,
Yep,
continue to do what you're doing.
yep.
And of course, I want to be, to serve others. And whether one woman listens to it or, 10,000 women listen to it, I mean, that's really, I'm learning my soul's journey is not just about loving myself, but like serving all of mankind. I mean, it really is like a deep desire because, like, I can see like all these different students that I've taught, like, especially females, because I
Mm-hmm.
have one that came back to me. I haven't taught her in a couple of years, and she came to my classroom the other day when we had parent teacher conferences, and she said, Miss Alexander, I just wanted you to know that you're the teacher that really has taught me to love myself. And I
Mm.
literally started crying because I was like,
Oh,
that's what it's about.
beautiful.
That right
Mm.
there is all it's about for me.
I wonder if that's like a part of her as well. That student, if it mirrored a part of
100%.
Tiffany as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Anything you bring into your space is a mirror of where you are and what you're feeling within yourself. So that's showing you that you're doing the work and integrating these parts of yourself. So when someone shows up to you, a teenage version of you, I'm to assume,
Right, right.
right, came to you and
Yeah.
said, "Hey, you know what? I'm actually feeling some self-love here." And it's being
Yeah.
mirrored back to you to show you that your teenage version right now is feeling that self-love internally,
Yeah.
which is really nice because yeah, everything subconsciously shows up in our reality.
Mhm.
Really loving this conversation. We've got so many good little nuggets today.
Yeah. And
It's
and
so
the
good.
one thing I love that you said it from the very beginning was like you made this connection between your relationship with your mother and everything else in your life. And when you were saying how, you were in a relationship with that man and it was dysfunctional, but it's dysfunction that you're used to. And then
Mhm.
I couldn't help but even notice the connection when he was criticizing your body. It's probably similar to what your mother used to do. And that just reminds me of even the conversations that we've had in the workshops where you would say, what is your definition of love?
Mhm.
And it goes back to childhood, and that's kind of like
Well, your
how,
first definition of love is how you define love is how your relationship with your mother is. So that's your
right?
first initial definition of what love is.
And then we seek that through everything else in the
Yeah.
same matter. So
Yeah.
it just reminded me of that. And you said that like right off the top. I was like, there's the nugget right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I started listening to this book on Audible called Mother Hunger because I have struggled with food. And she talks about the correlation between the lack of a mother's love and the relationship with women and food.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I mean, it was like I turned it up. I mean, I was like zoned in. And I have really struggled. If I get anxious, I want to eat something sweet. I
Right.
remember when I was married and my kids were younger, um, I was so unhappy, but I would make a pan of brownies and
Mm.
literally eat like half the pan in one day, then lie when my husband came home and I'd be like, oh yeah, the kids and I've been snacking on them, and it was me. It was me eating them all the time. And I was like, oh Jesus. And so when I started going through these different stages of healing, that old subconscious pattern resurfaced.
Right.
And I remember like mowing down some cookies and I couldn't hardly stop myself. And it was like, I was like, okay, what's happening right now? I was like, these
Like
are
I
old patterns that I thought I had gotten rid of. And now they are resurfacing like hot and heavy.
yeah.
And
It's your way of self-soothing, right? So when you're
yes,
thinking about it, whenever there is a food addiction and any form of addiction is usually aligned with your relationship dynamic with mom. When I'm
yeah.
looking at when I work on certain wounds with like eating disorders or body dysmorphia, they're aligned with your relationship to your father, even though your mom was highly critical. And
Hmm.
she was, so there's some dynamics there. But it
Yeah.
definitely is to regulate you and to self-soothe you at the end of the day
Yeah.
when you're binge eating like that,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and it's funny, like when you said, like your father, I had him on a pedestal for the
Mm-hmm.
longest time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning about the different polarities and the energy and how all that works, but it's like I made a list one night of men that I had dated that mirrored my mother. And
Right.
then I made a list of men that mirrored my father that
Right.
were very sweet men, like just so people pleasers, just precious as pie, but
Mm-hmm.
emotionally unavailable, scared to death of commitment. could not lean in when I wanted to have a deep conversation, didn't know how to hold space for that. And so I was like, oh shit. I have literally blamed everything on my mother in the
Hmm.
beginning of my journey and unraveling, or peeling back the layers. But now I've got to sit with this discomfort with my dad.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was really hard for me to face that. And I don't know if y'all follow this guy's names. I don't know how you pronounce it. Lauren Crean. It's Lorin. He's on Instagram. He's fabulous. But he had a free webinar about the father wound, and he led us through this guided meditation. And he was wanting us to see a vision of a safe masculine when we were growing up.
Right.
And it was like nothing would
Right.
pull up.
Hmm.
Right. Yep.
And I was like, and I could tell it was like it was trying to force like little moments with my dad.
Hmm.
But then all of a sudden, all these memories started to come in where I lacked safety, or I would come home and express things that had happened to me, and I don't even know where my dad was at. So
Yep.
he was extremely absent,
Yep. Of
even though he was a good man, right?
course. Yep.
And so I was like, shit, I have father wounds. I never thought I had father wounds. And
Right.
so
Right.
it
Right.
really, yeah. So I really want to encourage people like to be patient on their journey, because it's like, my ego was so strong in the beginning. I almost had like a spiritual ego. I was meditating all the time. Like my life revolved around spiritual work.
Right.
And to the point where it was like, you're not even experiencing joy anymore, because all
Right.
you do is want to journal and to go down rabbit holes trying to find answers, and you need to just let go a little bit.
Hmm.
But yeah, the father wound is something that's not been too far long ago. Because like I said, the first few years, I just really felt like it was all my mother.
Right.
And if you asked me anything about my dad, I would immediately, he'd be on the postal. I'd tell you these few little situations, that I loved, these memories that I had held on to.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And then when I had to really get down into the darkness, it was like, okay, when
Right.
this happened, what did your dad do? Did he
Yep.
Hmm.
protect you? Did he go down there and speak up for you? Did he do this? And I was like, oh, I don't know what he did. And
Right.
then I just kept going through those lists
Hmm.
of certain types of trauma, whether you want to call them little T trauma, big T trauma, doesn't matter. I don't have a recollection of any way my father handled those situations. So yeah, so and that's been both types of people. I've either dated my mother or I've dated my father.
Well, usually
Yeah.
that's what we do, whether
Yeah.
we like it or not, even when we're
Yep.
healed. We just
Yep.
want the better version
One
of
or the
who they
other.
are on the other spectrum.
Yeah.
Like when we start moving towards healthier relationship dynamics and you're doing the work and you're healing and you're assessing the situations and you're recognizing the patterns, we want to move towards the other spectrum of what that could look
Yep.
like. And then we want to
Yeah.
attract that type of experience. But no matter what, you're still going to bring in mom and dad because we live in a
Yeah.
world of duality. We live in a world of
Right.
contrast. And so it's very normal for us to constantly want to spiritually evolve. And so, in doing so, we need to bring in these types of experiences, whether we like it or not, in order for us to have a point of reference to
Yep.
grow.
Mm.
Right. So even when we assume I've done X amount of years of work and I've done this and now I know, well, if the universe is still mirroring something to you or the universe is still bringing in something into you, it's because it's showing up to help you spiritually evolve to the next phase of where you need to be. So
Yeah.
that's why I always say it's like a forever going journey. Have fun with it. There's going to be highs and there's going to be lows. There's so many great opportunities when it comes to doing this type of work. And it's not easy work either. We know this, but it's rewarding work, which is
Oh
what I
yeah.
love above everything else. Just to end, I know your podcast, you want to support more women, you want to, and you do have an authentic, beautiful way of connecting with women. What would you say to someone who maybe is just starting off on their journey, or like, what do you think you would recommend for them? Just a little something that would kind of help someone along their path.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's a female that came to me at school the other day, and of course, I always want to start thinking about everything I've done, but I wanted her to understand. Sometimes it just starts with you sitting with yourself, like putting Netflix away, putting your phone away, sitting in a room by yourself with cozy candlelights, whatever you need,
Mhm.
and feel the discomfort. Because I remember the first few times that I did journal after my spiritual awakening began, just sitting for 5 minutes, I wanted to grab my phone.
Right.
Or I would be like, okay, I don't really know why I'm feeling this, but I think you know what, I'm gonna go get something out of the refrigerator and I'm gonna go watch a movie.
Mhm.
To be patient with yourself, but to know that you're worth it. And like you just said, the journey's not always easy at all. It's
Mhm.
the hardest thing that you'll ever do,
Mhm.
but it is the most rewarding because the more authentic I become, the happier I am. The
Yep.
more authentic I become, and who I truly want to be, it's like the more the universe brings those type of people into, like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, your vibe and your tribe. And but I wish I would have had someone in the beginning that would have just said, slow down. Like, you do not have to sit there and meditate every
Yeah.
single day. Because like I said, whenever I first was catapulted after all that happened to me, within a 6 month period, I was so determined and driven as like this, oh, I'm this new hyper independent female. I don't
Right.
need anybody, and
Right.
started leaning in heavily to my masculine energy, and it was to protect me in a lot of ways. Like, fuck this, I'm not dating. And I didn't date for over 2 years, but it's like I wanted to have more patience for myself, like looking
Mhm.
back, and to slow down and sit with myself more often, and
Yep.
and just to give themselves grace on days that they
Exactly.
don't do everything they think they should, because that little good girl mentality would come up a lot. Like, if I did get on Netflix and binge watch a series, or if I
Right.
did go and eat 3 donuts,
Yeah.
I had to learn to give myself grace
Yes.
in that whole process. And then just finding those glimmers, because we can tend to society to focus on the negative all the time. And so I got to where I started a gratitude journal, and it didn't matter if it was as simple as a child's laughter and seeing a butterfly for
Hmm.
that day. And it can do so much just to have a gratitude journal in the beginning of your journey when you are really trying to focus on, because in the beginning you're like, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me, I don't want to feel this way anymore, I'm so sick and tired of being in these relationships, my mother won't call and reach out to me, why does she not love me the way she needs to love
Right.
me,
Right. Right.
all these woe is
So that
me
was a wound
stories.
that Ivana recently went through. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause like it's crazy because like my mom still has not reached out to me.
Wow.
I mean, the last thing I said to her was, because I could tell her the ways that she hurt me as a child and that I understood and I forgave her. And I even would try to validate her feelings as a child and what she had went through. And she just looked at me and said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not perfect like you. It's like now I don't even have hatred towards her. I just see her with nothing but love. Now, is she a part of my life? No. But for probably 6 months, I would bawl at night and think, if my kids did not talk to me, I would be at their doorstep with flowers and candy and blowing their phone up and
Yeah.
texting them and being like,
Yeah.
how do we work this out? How can I fix this? I love you. And my mom's never done that, but she doesn't have the capacity. She doesn't have the tools, and she's not done the healing. So I don't have hatred in my heart for her
It's not a
anymore.
reflection of you. Yeah.
No,
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
absolutely not. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, girls, I'm long-winded.
I
I
But
love
love
it.
it. We love
But
it.
yes, I would say to them to give themselves grace and to go slow,
I love
and
that.
remember to look at those glimmers.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tiffany. This was a beautiful conversation. I loved every topic that we talked about. This was a real one and a raw one. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you so much for coming on to the Soul Thrive podcast today.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you so
much,
much for
Tiffany.
having me. I appreciate you guys.